very much, everyone. Appreciate you coming along to listen to me today, and I am aware I'm standing between you and food, so we'll try and move along quite briskly. In terms of why would you want to listen to me, I'm Snow's CIO, so I'm not here as a salesperson. I've worked in IT for 25 years now. Worked at a number of different companies. I've looked after infrastructure for Sophos, ran their sort of data centers and all their customer-facing services. I used to run the infrastructure and designed it for a UK ISP, and I was involved in Message Labs. I actually built the second ever Message Labs email filtering server. Our developer came up with the first one. He handed me a very bad set of instructions, and I had to turn that into a working process that we then scaled up to scan well over 1 billion emails a month. And one of the reasons Snow sent me along to talk about these kind of things is I was a customer at a previous company where I worked. When I was at Sophos, I used Snow's products and services. So I was an active user of the services that we supply. What do? Well, we call it technology asset management. We look at what you're consuming, what your IT estate looks like, and we help you optimize that and run it more efficiently. We've got over 3,000 customers. We've hit a reasonable scale in terms of revenue, and we are processing an awful lot of data from all those customers. We're looking at all of the things that get found through our discovery tools and updating that constantly. So what am I going to talk about today? Well, it's about our IT priorities going into 2023. So Snow runs a survey. We do it every year, and we've got between 800 and 1,000 sort of IT leaders contributing to give us a perspective on what everybody is focusing on for the year ahead. And the 5 that I want to talk about today, you can see up here. So the first one I want to touch on is risk. And this almost comes back to the question I often get asked if you ever do an interview: what keeps you awake at night? What keeps CIOs worried? And it's definitely risk. I was recently at a big IT conference in the US, 9,000 attendees, and I chatted to a lot of other CIOs and VPs, and I was really struck by how common it was that they'd suffered ransomware. It got to the point that I felt like 1 in every 2 people I spoke to said, "Oh, I'm here because we've been hit with ransomware, and we're struggling to work out how we're going to respond." And a lot of that comes from how do you manage the level of risk that you're facing. It was often the case that vulnerabilities that existed in their technology estate were how the bad guys had got in the first place. So how do you manage that and stay on top of it? But there's a number of other things that I think are concerning in this space, whether that's how do you protect yourself from insiders? How do you make sure that things are carefully segregated and locked down? One of the ones we've seen and is a concern for us is things like MFA prompt bombing. So I'm sure most of you have implemented MFA and have to second factor authenticate. One of the easiest ways to get through it for the bad guys is they just send somebody 100 MFA requests. And eventually your employee gets so fed up with the MFA requests they hit approve. Which sounds really, really dumb, but if it works for the bad guys, they're going to do that kind of thing. And that's a really difficult one to actually manage and stay on top of. And of course, one of the things that we're seeing, and a lot of companies focus on, and indeed we're doing to our suppliers, is we're looking at their levels of compliance. Before you take on a supplier, how good is their cybersecurity? Are you adding risk by taking on that supplier? How do I go about dealing with some of this internally? Well, one of the things that we found really essential is understanding your asset estate, being able to look at all the devices out there and what software levels they're running. So part of Snow's platform is we analyze all of your estate, and we then compare that against the NIST list of vulnerabilities, and we can give you the insight and the intelligence on whether or not you're running vulnerable pieces of software. Whether that's things like Log4j, or Apache struts was a particular one that I remember being able to go into our tool and look for where are we running struts. That was the vulnerability that took out Equifax. If you remember that, they had a huge data breach in the US because they were running an unpatched version of Apache struts. And the really sad thing in that case is they knew about the vulnerability, they had meetings where they discussed it, but they didn't know where it was deployed in their estate, and that's what then caught them out. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about risk. That's definitely one of IT's priorities. One of the areas though that really comes up strongly in the surveys and when we talk to people at the moment is reducing IT costs. How do you make your budget go further? How do you make sure that the money that you're spending is effective? Are you getting the return on your investment? And working with our customers, we do find that in the worst case scenario, you can find organizations where 30% of their license spend is just wasted. It's on licenses that people are no longer consuming or using. So this is a really popular area where people are spending their time at the moment, because if you can recover some of that and invest that in other projects, in other things that you want to do, it's a way of still taking the business forward without having to struggle. This all really begins with understanding what you've got. Understanding then, is it being used? Tackling that waste. I think one of the things that we've also done as a company is we've also looked at some of our sunk costs. We've looked at buildings, we've looked at telephony, telcos, the kind of things that you sign on longer term contracts. Are we actually on top of all the things that you often write off as well? And really just being hot on the contract cycle. I'm sure this is something you're all looking at and probably doing anyway, but it's a key thing that comes out in our priorities report. I think one of the things that's been a definite trend, and we saw come through very strongly in the report, was the amount of money that's been invested into SaaS applications. Over 2/3 of organisations reported really increased SaaS investment in this year. And part of this, I think, comes from the way a lot of the providers sell. I don't know if you've heard of the A-bit model. Anyone but IT. So the sales team's goal is to talk to anybody but the IT function who are just seen as blockers. So if you're selling a marketing tool, get hold of somebody in marketing. Sales tool, let's get hold of somebody in sales and sell directly to the business unit. And that really has led to this transition we've seen over the last couple of years where IT don't control the technology spend anymore. A large part of it is now happening outside of IT. And one of the ways I've tried to address that is made it really easy for people to get single sign-on working. You want to buy an app? I'll set it up for single sign-on. As long as it's got SAML support, we'll put that in, because then we've got the ability to at least gauge some usage, see what's going on. But that still doesn't cover you for the use cases where people set something up on a credit card, they don't put it into SSO, and it's just got usernames and passwords running. One of the ways our technology tackles that is we've got a browser plugin that actually looks at traffic from individual people's computers. But we don't send the web traffic over the network. Instead, we've got a rules engine that's built into the plugin. And it looks for SaaS applications, and it only sends the telemetry that this user used box.com or this person used DocuSign back to our point. So we're not impinging on anybody's privacy, but we are able to detect all that SaaS usage. And I think one of the frightening ones is when you discover people with AWS accounts that you didn't know existed, and they're paying for it on a credit card, and you've got all this cloud infrastructure that's running that you as IT have no clue even exists. So that's a really powerful thing that we've done for a lot of people. And also just finding more SaaS applications. It is amazing, depending on which survey and who you talk to, how many most organisations have got. But it can be between 120 and 250 is pretty typical for most organisations. So let's say you've done some of these things, you're looking at your costs, what kind of return, what kind of benefit can you get from this? This is actually one of our case studies. This is one of our current customers. So they invested in going down this approach. They set up a good team to run it, and they identified $95 million worth of savings. And in terms of an ROI, this was an ROI of sort of 80 times what it cost them to do. So this is a massive return on investment by going and looking at this. Now they had some scale at 30,000 users, but if you get up to that scale, there's some serious amounts of money that you might be able to free up by actually looking at whether you're consuming all the things that you're paying for. Okay, so we talked about risk, we talked about cost. I did want to come on to digital and cloud and kind of cover some of this. So we saw a real uptick in digital transformation efforts, just huge in 2020. I mean, I've got a number of things on the screen here that you can see of just organisation after organisation saying massive increase in what people are spending on digital transformation. And a lot of that has led to the increase in public cloud spend. The downside of all these digital transformation efforts is actually what it costs, and are you able to stay on top of that? This is actually data from Gartner that they found from talking to people, but there is a belief that we'll see a huge portion of IT budgets going into public cloud, and lots of people are finding that they're overrunning their budget. They're spending more than they planned to in the cloud. They didn't anticipate the cost would be this much. And trying to navigate that cloud billing is sometimes a real challenge. Don't know if you've had the Azure bill that arrives and it's like 120 pages of paper, and they literally still post it to me every month, and I keep telling them I don't need 120 pages of paper, but they keep sending it. And trying to understand that is a real challenge for people. So how do you address that controlling the cloud cost problem? Well, the approach that a lot of people are talking about is is around the FinOps space, and it kind of talks through the way that you can correctly manage your cloud costs and stay on top of it. And the first step of that is to understand that your cloud spend it's not owned by IT anymore. You've got a whole bunch of business functions who are now engaged in spending in this, and you have to get involved with those stakeholders. I've certainly found a struggle going and talking to our engineering team, talk to a bunch of developers and say, I want to talk to you about this. And they say, yeah, we know what we're doing. We're the experts in this. We don't need you to get involved. And it has been a challenge to build those relationships with groups who might typically think they know what they're doing. So I think recognizing not only who those stakeholders are, but how you're going to interact with them is really key. You have to build the bridges. You have to find a way of getting a working relationship with groups who might think they know what they're doing. If you can get that agreement and that collaboration going, it can make a big difference to the success of taking it forward. Now the FinOps framework, the way they actually talk about it, it's a foundation that's been created by a number of people in this space to talk about how best to manage your cloud operations and control the costs. And they talk on a very careful model of starting off by just providing information, then trying to optimize it and figure out where you can save money, and then moving into a more of an automated system where you can actually manage your costs an awful lot better. I think the best way of trying to do this is recognize that it's something that you have to mature. So at a previous company, we had a very big AWS bill. We were spending $17 million a year, sort of $1.7 million a month on AWS. And that's a challenging bill to understand and segregate up and differentiate. And what we did was we had 120 different AWS accounts. And we had an owner within the business for every account. And we started off just by giving them weekly reporting. How much are you spending? How much are you on track to spend by the end of the month? You know, is this a big change from where you were last month? And I brought that in after one of our development teams ran up a scalability lab. So big load testing environment, lots of servers, and they forgot to turn it off. And at the end of the month, we spent an extra $60,000 on that scalability lab to sit there for 2 weeks doing absolutely nothing because they forgot to go in and shut it all down at the end of their testing. So by switching to that weekly reporting format, that didn't happen again. The manager of that team, who was responsible for the bill, because we had that account to owner relationship, was able to say, hold on, my monthly bill is on track to be much higher than it was last month. What have we forgotten to turn off? So that's the real first step, that inform and tell people what's going on. Beyond that then, you want to optimize it. And one of the things that I used to spend my own time doing, about half an hour a month, I would go in and delete unattached EBS volumes. Load balancers that had been disconnected from any resources, deallocate IP addresses. And I typically saved $6,000 every single month, so about 70 grand a year, just by going in and getting rid of things that had been left idle, or they deleted the VM and not cancelled the miscellaneous services around it. So that was a huge cost saving, and for me, that paid for the tooling that gave me that visibility. So that was a very easy thing to justify spending money on. When you get a bit further along, you can automate some of that. You can then start saying unattached EBS volumes which have not been accessed for over 30 days, I'm going to delete. But that's a level of maturity that you get to in time. You can't really get there all in one hit. If you've not looked at FinOps or gone into that, it's certainly an area worth considering. They do a whole bunch of education, and it's a nice way of tackling it with the business because it's designed to be cross-functional. Okay, next priority. I did want to talk about this one, and this has been interesting for us. We're not really facing regulations that strongly. This is yet to hit kind of the GDPR point, where big regulations come in and suddenly everybody's got to do a lot more on sustainability. A lot of the reason why this mattered to us is actually from our staff. We've had a lot of our employees come and talk to us and say, well, what are we doing about sustainability? How are we managing our own impact on the environment? So that started us off on this journey and saying, well, we need to be able to look at this. And what was really interesting here was when you look at your typical IT enterprise greenhouse gas emissions, you can see the chart up here, it's interesting how it's broken out. Now, I would add, if your business is about smelting aluminium, you're probably not going to be worried too much about your energy consumption in IT. But if you are looking from an IT perspective, these are the areas that you want to look at. It is a bit of a data problem. If you can get your electricity bills and understand what you're consuming, that can be a really good step where you start to understand what's going on. But the biggest source, which was a surprise when we looked into it, is the purchased hardware. Actually buying your mobile phones, buying your laptops, and the greenhouse gases from that is probably your biggest area of single contribution. And most of that comes from manufacturing. When you manufacture a mobile phone, that's when the greenhouse gas emissions are created, not when you're charging it up and using it on a day-to-day basis. And it's the same with laptops. Servers, no, it's more about the use. So where you locate them, what kind of data center, the power in your data center, whether it's renewable or not, has a much bigger factor. But certainly for your end user devices, you need to be able to track what they're doing, how long you're keeping them, and one of the most important things is trying to make sure you've got TCO certification. One of our customers who's done a lot of work on this is Jaguar Land Rover. They actually came to us. One of their big 7 strategic pillars, they said, is how do we get to net zero? And they wanted to tackle their IT estate. So the big thing for them was we want laptops and equipment that's been designed in the right way. And we were able to help them identify from their estate where they were, track it and measure it. And over the course of a 12-month period, they actually increased their certification, their devices, by a factor of 8 in some cases when you looked at their desktops and 6 on their laptops. So they're now up at about 70% TCO certified for their actual hardware estate. And for that, that's been a really huge change that they're able to talk about how they're really measuring it and tracking it. And they've got that visibility. So for them, that was a key part of their strategy they needed to deliver. Okay, final real topic I wanted to get into, which again, as I said, came up in this priority survey that we've done, is around automation. And this is one that's quite close to my own heart in IT, because the interesting thing that we found from this is people aren't necessarily looking to automate to eliminate jobs, but to make jobs better. I was recently recruiting somebody, and I kind of second interview for my team on certain roles, and we had a desktop engineer. And the person we were talking to who had applied for the role, their job at their current company was just to provision new users. They spent all their time creating email accounts, setting up AD groups, onboarding people, and that was all they got to do. It was not a very interesting job, which is why they'd applied for a job with us. And their big question in the interview was, well, would I have to do any of that? We were able to say, no, you don't do any of that. We've automated it all. We've put in the tools and the automation so that the hiring manager or the person in our HR team creates the user profile, and it then goes off and does all the provisioning. Less chance of human error, and it's actually saved us a huge amount of time. We went in and did a bit of a, well, what benefit has it actually had? And added up the time it would have taken to do those processes manually, and it's saving us the equivalent of 2 full-time people. So I could either have 2 people doing basic account provisioning and setting up all the app access and doing all of that very basic IT work, or I can automate it. So I think that's a really nice way of enriching IT's role within the business and giving them more interesting things to do. So that's nice to see as a trend that people are looking at. Okay, so how can Snow help with a lot of this? Well, I've mentioned some of the tools and things that we've done along the way in order to sort of tackle this. We're obviously looking at your entire technology estate, and our goal is to help you understand that end-to-end solution, whether you need to manage risk, whether you need to improve your focus on cost and optimization, whether it's cloud and your public cloud usage that's going on. We're able to help in all these areas, or indeed the automation example that I gave, that's using one of our own products. We believe that that's a space called technology intelligence, giving you a better understanding of your estate and helping you to run it more effectively.